Welcome to The Volley, a podcast by tennis majors, bringing you in-depth insights into tennis's latest hot topics from the tennis majors team.
Hello and welcome to The Volley, a podcast by tennis majors. This is your home for in-depth chat and insight into the biggest tennis news around the globe with the tennis majors team. I'm your host, Max Whittle, really excited to have you guys along today as we focus our attention on the All England Club, Wimbledon, the championships, however you choose to call it, one of the most prestigious tennis events and venues in the world, full of tradition, taste, and, well, rain now and again. Here at Tennis Majors, we are dedicated to discussing the latest tennis news via digital media, bringing you, the tennis fans, videos, debates, and news from the tennis world. The first Wimbledon championship was held in 1877 and a lot has changed since then. But the word change is something the powers that be at Wimbledon have grappled with over the years. Such is the importance of tradition. But modernity has seemingly entered the conversation. Slowly but surely, roofs were introduced, the grass was tweaked, and from next year, Middle Sunday will no longer be a day off for players. The evolving Wimbledon, then, is a stage like no other, but as famous as it is, secrets and facts will come to light on this episode. Joining me on The Volley today is sports journalist and broadcaster Simon Cambers, who fondly remembers watching John McEnroe at his first ever trip to Wimbledon. He knows the place like the back of his hand. Simon, welcome to the Volley podcast. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure, our pleasure. Well, you've spent plenty of time at Wimbledon over the years, and that means, of course, a lot of talk about grass, and specifically in 2021, lots of players falling over under the roof on centre court and court one. People surely noticed this during Novak Djokovic's first round match, but it came to a head this year when Serena Williams had to withdraw through injury after a bad fall in her first action. Her coach Patrick Mouratoglou, Simon, proposed that the All England club allow for pimples to be added to the side of players' shoes, not just on the soles, because it's mainly the inside of the foot where players push off to change direction. Why do the rules and regulations not allow for this currently, and do you see that changing now?
I don't see it changing for a while unless they find... the holy grail of Wimbledon is do not damage the courts. If you watch a match, if you watch the beginning where the umpire talks to the two players at the net, normally in tournaments they just say something like, it's the usual rules, Hawkeye challenges, 4-minute warm-up, 1 minute, go on, off you go. But here they add in a quick, and please don't damage the grass, don't smash it with your racket, behave yourselves. The worst thing you can do, and the worst fine you'll ever get here, the worst fine that ever was given was Heather Watson when she damaged the grass once for $20,000. So don't damage the grass. And what also damages the grass is pimples on the outside of shoes. Now, back in the day when you played on grass, you could buy a pair of grass court shoes that had pimples and really helped you, move and not slide around when it's slippery and, keep your footing. But they do not want to do that here at the All England Club because they don't want the courts to be damaged. I think they fear that if a shoe had pimples on the side, as Patrick Mouratoglou suggests, it would cause a lot of wear and tear to the court. I don't know whether they've looked into how the technology of shoes has advanced over the years. I'm sure now the pimples probably don't damage the court as much as they used to, but I know that that's their main thinking on the subject.
Should player health not be the priority over grass health?
Well, yes, in an ideal world, but you've got to remember that Wimbledon is a very unique setup with a club running a Grand Slam tournament. Now, in theory, that should never be the case. It should be totally separate and, no kind of conflicts of interest. But this is a club, and it's their grass, and they want to protect it. The centre court doesn't get played on other than the 2 weeks in the year. It's never touched outside of the 2 weeks of the fortnight, with the one exception, which is when they get 4 women to go and play and practice on it the day before, a couple of days before. It's a really sort of unique event where they just get them to test it out, test the technology, test Hawkeye and stuff like that. It's quite fun. And the reason it's women is because the theory goes that the women tread lighter on the court and won't damage it so much. So it's all about protecting the courts. And of course, player health is imperative. Without the players, you don't have a tournament. But then again, without the grass, you don't have a tournament either. So from Wimbledon's point of view, they want to protect the grass. I mean, it's a really interesting topic, and it's been interesting listening to the reactions to the slippery courts this year.
Just so the listeners can see why changing things like this is such a challenge at Wimbledon, Simon mentioned it there. There are 15 permanent ground staff that work and 28 during the championships. There's a very specific grass cut height of 8 millimetres, which has been in effect since 1995. And they say it's a 15-month process to prepare a championship standard court, which I'm not sure quite how that works. But they care about the surface, is what I'm saying. Simon, has the type of grass changed at all in recent years, or has it always been the same?
Not in recent years. I mean, it depends what you call recent. The time it changed was in 2002, when, after several years of a lot of serve and volley tennis, a lot of big servers, very short points, very few rallies, Wimbledon don't like being criticised. This is one thing you'll realise if you watch Wimbledon a lot. They don't like criticism. So they ended up changing the type of grass. And it's gone from, I can't remember the exact specifics, but it's gone from being one particular type of grass that had 70% of one form and 30% of another, to being 100% of another form of grass, which is slightly thicker, slightly more durable, lasts longer in the 2 weeks, and doesn't sort of fade away. I mean, anyone who watched Wimbledon back in the day will remember, sort of brown courts almost, with the grass completely worn off, the line going from the serve and volley who ran in and slid in through the centre of the court. That doesn't exist anymore, partly because there's not much serve and volley, but also because the courts are much more durable and the grass holds up better.
Well, as we look at the balance between tradition and modernity at Wimbledon, the topic of players falling over comes back to the roof on both show courts. The moisture it creates, the humidity caused by thousands of people breathing. Do you see further changes being made? Patrick mentioned air conditioning under the surface, for example, as a result of the injuries that we've seen.
Yeah, I'm sure they will be looking at this from the All England Club, because, as I said, they don't like criticism. So even though I have to say that slippery grass courts is nothing new and not surprising, grass is a slippery. So, you try and play anything on grass, you're going to slip over occasionally. But it was exacerbated, probably, it seems, by the fact the roof was closed. It adds to the humidity. There's a little bit more moisture in the air. And certainly most of the slips were a little bit behind the court, where the grass had not been used that much. And in the first couple of days of the tournament, it tends to be that most of the slips come then. We've seen quite a lot. Thankfully, we've not seen any serious injuries since, sadly, Serena Williams and, of course, Adrian Manarino, who was 2-1 up on Roger Federer before he slipped and hurt himself and had to quit in the beginning of the fifth. So, the good thing is that players have not been hurt by this going forward, as the courts have dried out, as they always do. But you're right, the roof has added that moisture, and although there is air conditioning inside it to sort of, I can't remember what they call it. They make the whole court, obviously they make it ready to play, but there's a specific word that I've forgotten for now. But they make sure that the conditions are good to play on. But of course, that extra bit of humidity means that the courts could be a little slipperier in those areas where the grass has not been used. And you're right, I personally don't know what the technology is for under soil air conditioning. Obviously there's under soil heating in football, for example, but under soil air conditioning, if that's a thing that could be done, I'm sure that Wimbledon would be looking at it.
It's a whole new world indeed. Could you give us an idea of the process that goes on at Wimbledon and with the powers that be, as they're called, when it comes to making rules and facility changes?
Well, it sometimes feels like Wimbledon's a bit of a dinosaur. It takes a long time to change things. But they pride themselves on being innovators as well. They did create a roof over centre court when they didn't think it could be done. They did manage to turn around in 2012 when people said, how are you going to stage the Olympics so soon after Wimbledon? They played it 3 weeks after, so the grass was able to be almost prepared for that. They've done a lot of good things over the years in terms of technology, in terms of embracing technology. But some things do take a long time to change. I mean, the all-white clothing, or the predominantly white clothing rule, still exists. There are a lot of sort of slightly irritating rules that the players have to go through and adhere to. But in general, I think they're always responsive to to change. It just takes a long time because it has to go. It is a club, and as a club, it has a committee, and the committee make the decisions. And there's a championships committee. Tim Henman, the former British number one, the world number four times a semi-finalist at Wimbledon in the late 90s and early 2000s, he is on that committee. Has often been talked about as a potential future chairman. I'm not sure he's going to go and do that job anymore, but he's on there. So it's got former players there as well. They are the ones responsible for making this change happen. But they listen to the tours. They have a lot of discussions. There's a lot of one-upmanship between the Grand Slams. They've started to work together a little bit more over time, but they're constantly looking for ways to stand out from each other. So if suddenly having air conditioning under a grass court was something that would make Wimbledon look really good, there is no question they would do it. They're willing to do those things. It just takes a little bit of time.
Well, the all-white clothing certainly makes them stand out at Wimbledon. The way you said that, though, do you think that will ever change?
I think it will change at some stage. I mean, look at this year with Middle Sunday. It's been in existence since 1902 as a day of rest. Harks back to a time when Britain, nothing was open on a Sunday. Pubs only open in the evenings. No shops were open. You couldn't do anything. They didn't play football on a Sunday until the mid 1970s. The fact that they did it in 1974 was the first football match in the top level on a Sunday, and then it was only in 83 before they played one on TV. So that sort of thing took a long time to change the Sunday feel. There was no play at Wimbledon on that Middle Sunday. It was a day of rest. It was something that journalists loved because it was a bit of a breather. We work ourselves into the ground over these 2 weeks, and you do really appreciate that day. But in 2021 and 2022 and going forward, it doesn't really make any sense. It also, removing it, so from next year, 2022, there will be play on the Middle Sunday. I mean, there's been play on the Middle Sunday 4 times in history when there was so much rain they had to catch up. But in general, it's always been a day off. From next year, they will bring that in. They're saying that it just makes the tournament better, and it does in terms of players will now, barring nightmare rain conditions, play every other day instead of having that weird situation we have with what's called Manic Monday on the second Monday of the tournament, where the women's fourth round matches are all played, as are the men's, but the women then have to come back and play the next day, which is not really fair compared to the men. So from now on, from next year, that will change to playing every other day, which is a good thing. And of course, it's a money-making opportunity for Wimbledon. They will no doubt raise their debenture prices to cover some of that, because to people who pay for these debenture tickets, which, just to explain, are tickets that they're the only ones you can officially resell. You pay £100,000 for a debenture over 5 years. You get one ticket for a centre court every day, but it's so valuable that you can pretty much make your money if you sell half of them, use the other half if you want to, and at the end of the 5 years you can sell your debenture back to the club for a guaranteed same price you paid for it. So of course there's inflation to take into account, but it's a very good deal. I often thought, if you had money, that is a good investment. Unfortunately, not too many people have got 100 grand lying around, but it just shows you that they are willing to change. Middle Sunday is changing. And I think the all-white, just to go back to your question, sorry to ramble on, the all-white ruling, I think at some stage they will be a little bit more relaxed with it. It's a bit ridiculous in 2021 to force people to wear a certain colour clothing just because it's something they've always done. It just takes time to change these things, and it needs progressive people, younger people on the committee, and that also takes time.
Yes, are there any young people on that board at the moment? I was going to ask you, what would be the youngest?
Well, it depends what your definition of young is.
let's say 30 and under.
No, there are none under that. But there are some people in their sort of 30s and maybe 40s, just about. That'd be the youngest. But there are some much older people on there too. And they're just people who've been around a long time, but also who've been connected with the club a long time. And when you're a member of an individual club of any kind for a long time, I think you sort of get institutionalised a little bit, and it is hard to change away from where you've been. So, as I said, it takes a progressive mind to force through some change, but I think it'll happen one day.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the Middle Sunday. Wimbledon will, of course, join the other 3 Grand Slams in playing 14 consecutive days of tennis. You've mentioned that you think it's a good idea. Why did it take so long to introduce, do you think?
I think, the interesting question is whether they would have done it had there not been a pandemic. I think the pandemic definitely hastened it, because Wimbledon, of course, was not able to be held in 2020. And they lost a lot of money from that, even though they had incredible foresight to have pandemic insurance, which covered probably about half of the cost, about 110 million or so pounds, which is brilliant for the Wimbledon. It enabled them to survive and thrive this year. But, they know that they need to make money, and this is a big money-making opportunity. They can increase, as I said, the debenture ticket prices. They can renegotiate TV deals because there's an extra day of TV. It's a Sunday. So I think what you'll see next year is it be what used to be called a sort of People's Sunday, when there was middle play on that middle Sunday. As I said, it happened 4 times. The club just allowed people to queue up and get tickets on the day. So it was really for the normal tennis fan, as opposed to, people who may be a little bit more privileged and were able to get tickets in different ways. This way, I think what you'll see next year is a combination of the two. There'll be a lot of tickets made available for the regular tennis and sports fans who will make it a really special atmosphere on that day, and it'll be something that they can celebrate. So they can, as I said, they will renegotiate TV rights. They'll get a huge crowd on that Sunday. It'll do very well on TV as a weekend. And it's a good money-making opportunity, and it also happens to be a very sensible thing in terms of the tournament, as I say, just making the players have that regularity of play day in, day off. But it was interesting talking to a few players about it. They were, slightly sad to see it go, because they always liked that day where they could relax, maybe go into the Wimbledon village nearby and have a coffee and just take it easy and not worry too much about tennis, and then reset on the Monday. It was quite a unique thing, but in many ways it was a bit archaic.
Yeah, it sounds like we'll have to get used to lots of changes. And Sally Bolton, who's the chief executive at the All England Lawn Tennis Club, she said that Wimbledon has continuously evolved to meet changing demands and behaviours of the fans. And I'm just intrigued, from your perspective, what are those demands and behaviours?
Yeah, that's an interesting a line from Sally Bolton. I think what she means really is, in the past it was very difficult to get a ticket for Wimbledon unless you queued up. The Wimbledon queue, which snaked around Wimbledon Park opposite, was a very famous part of Wimbledon, and Wimbledon liked that, and they really appreciated it and promoted it. I don't know exactly whether that will come back in the same form, or whether it will just be more democratically possible to buy tickets online if you're quick, or there'll be a combination of the two. I think Wimbledon like to be seen as a sort of inclusive event, even when it's an incredibly elite tennis club. The remarkable thing about the All England Club is what it costs to be a member. If you're a player, a tennis player who wants to join Wimbledon, or a person who wants to join Wimbledon, you have to be a pretty decent player, to be honest. Not that great, but you have to be okay. And it costs £95 to join. You don't pay for courts. It's a hugely subsidised restaurant. It's a remarkably elite club. There are not that many members. I think there are about 150 full members. It's really dead man's shoes in terms of getting in. When someone dies, then there's a space free. It's a remarkable club in many ways. £95 is it's something I don't think too many people know, and it's something they sort of keep secret. They don't broadcast that, but I've ruined that for them now. But it's a pretty strange setup in some ways. So, from that point of view, they like to keep themselves, but it is also, they want to be seen to be inclusive. They're working with the local council to let players on during the middle Sunday. They were doing a sort of inclusive event with people from outside playing and stuff. So there are lots of ways they can make it more democratic in terms of the ability to buy tickets for normal fans who may not otherwise get the chance.
What's the most Wimbledon thing about Wimbledon? The one thing that will never go away?
I think my favourite / least favourite thing about Wimbledon, if I was a player, I would have hated it. And I ended up writing a piece in the New York Times about this about 3 years ago, is the Wimbledon groan. Now, this is the noise that you will hear when someone misses a shot, particularly when they do a double fault, or a poor shot when they had a chance to put it away and they miss it. Just a really sort of, it's a almost like an exhalation of air. It just goes, ugh. And I talked to a lot of players about it. Pat Cash told me that he had to get a sports psychologist purely because of that. He hated it. He wanted to tell the crowd to shut up. Pam Shriver said she, in her last ever appearance in singles at Wimbledon, she double faulted and the ball bounced before it hit the nets, and she heard that groan and she wanted to just take a racket around the crowd and start telling them what's what. It's a really unique thing. It does happen elsewhere, but I think because of the acoustics in centre court in particular, there's that certain feeling of, and it often used to happen to British players as well, because the excitement for British players would be raised, and then suddenly they disappointed, and it is a sort of disappointing groan. Ugh.
Simon, can we hear that groan one more time? There it is. So there's no better advert for getting those tickets next year for Wimbledon than that groan right there. You can hear that Simon's never short of a tennis opinion or a groan. Make sure you head to tennismajors.com after this episode to read all of his work without the constant interruption from me. So that is a bonus. When did you make your Wimbledon debut, Simon?
I think my first... I came as a fan back in the 1980s. I watched John McEnroe play in 1989. And when he came from 2 sets down to beat Darren Cahill in the first round, I queued up to get on the old court number 2, where you could stand there was a little standing area, and McEnroe was losing and it was raining, and so I managed to get in that time. And I stood there for the next 3.5 hours watching him come back, and I was a massive McEnroe fan. I loved that experience. But in terms of professionally working, I think my first one was 1997. I did every year up to 2003. I missed 5 years while I wasn't working specifically in tennis, exclusively in tennis. And then from 2009 to today, I've been back, and I write for a bunch of places, including The Guardian and ESPN, and of course Tennis Majors.
Well, since that first year that you covered them, what's been the most important transition the All England Club have made, in your opinion?
Well, I think the roofs. It has to be the roofs, because the number of times we sat through rain interruptions, it's a killer. It's from a broadcasting point of view, it's a nightmare. They fill it with old footage, which is great, but it's still not the same. There's a lot of waiting around. So getting that roof over centre court, which opened in 2009, that was definitely the biggest improvement. I mean, Court 1 was rebuilt back in about 2000. So the new Court 1 is there. Where what was Court 1 is now the media centre, and I think the media centre in the next couple of years is going to be changed and moved into the broadcast centre. So they're always changing. They're always building here. This is the thing. They say they take time to change, but they are always innovating and building and trying new things. And they have great plans for this place in terms of making it much more accessible, walking around, and a really relaxed feel. So watch this space over the next 5 to 10 years.
Watch this space indeed. Well, one of my final questions to you, Simon, and don't say more cream on the strawberries. What change would you make at Wimbledon? What would it be if you could do anything?
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it?
What about a giant roof over the entire
yeah, that'd be excellent. Yeah, one massive roof would be perfect. I think. Good question. I mean, there are lots. I tell you what. One little thing I would like is, it's another thing that Wimbledon have held on to for a long time. When players come onto court, there's no introduction for the players. When they're warming up, there's no introduction. There's just a little bio on the scoreboard, if you're lucky. And on the outside courts, there's nothing. I think players deserve an introduction, and especially players who people may not know too much about. This will inform them and give them a reason to get behind them. And then players have a lot of players have really interesting backstories, and I'd like to see, in the same way that the other Grand Slams do. You see it at Roland Garros and the French Open when Rafael Nadal's introduced and Marc Maury, the MC, starts going through all the years that Nadal won the French Open. 2005, 2006, 2007, etc. It really builds an atmosphere, and I would like to see that come in here, and I think it will. It might just take a couple of years.
Well, it was fascinating what you were saying about the slams competing with each other. Do you feel like the 3 other Grand Slams have taken much from Wimbledon, or because it's so traditional, do they almost refuse to do that?
No, I don't know if they deliberately move away from tradition as such. I mean, they all have their own little things that they hold on to, but certainly some try to push the boat. Often it's a battle in prize money terms. I mean, Australian Open over the last couple of years has tried to get up to $100 million. Now, they're in financial difficulty now because they were unable to hold the Australian Open. Well, they held it in 2020, but they were unable to hold it properly in terms of having full fans. They used up most of their reserves. So I think the prize money war has gone for a while because of the pandemic. You saw Roland Garros reduce their prize money a little bit, as did Wimbledon in certain ways. So I think that's disappeared. And yeah, they all try to outdo each other, just in little ways, and they like to think that they're the best at certain things. You know, France likes to be the chicest of the four, which it is. Australia likes to be the friendliest, the fun slam, the glamour slam, and US likes to be, you know, a little bit more in your face, and the atmosphere being part of it and the fans being a part of the experience. So they all have something unique about them and something that makes them all interesting.
Well, Simon, thank you for all of those little secrets that you've shared about Wimbledon. I found it very fascinating, and I hope the listeners have as well.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thanks for chatting.
So a big thank you to Simon Cambers for joining us on The Volley. Make sure you check out his work over at tennismajors.com, and stick with us here on the podcast, tennismajors.com, Spotify, and all main media platforms. See you soon.